Shabbat Shalom. Again, nice to gather for a simcha as we celebrate the first bat mitzvah of this year's 7th grade class. Meredith, thank you for breaking the ice. I'll start with a little story about our almost 3-year-old dog, Bumble. He gets very excited when we take him for walks. Actually, that's not fully accurate. He gets way too excited when we take him for walks. Pretty much anything, bunnies, squirrels, other dogs, people, are among the things that all get him riled up. And yes, we're working on changing his behavior. Thankfully, he's very friendly to visitors and to all people who come over. As we're teaching him, we're working to help him overcome any stressful situations. So sometimes I take him out at night when I think there are going to be no other people or dogs and fewer distractions. That's exactly what I did a few weeks ago. And everything went really well. So I decided to go a little bit further. Take him, just a little bit more, give him a little more exercise. And there was an open field down my block, so I figured I'd take him there instead of turning home. As we came to the open area, Bumble looked up at the sky, and he just turned and stared. It was a plane flying overhead with its flashing lights, and you could hear its motor. And at first, he simply stared at it. And then I think he thought it was some kind of enemy coming down to attack him, maybe a UFO or an alien ship. He got quite excited. He went up on his hind legs and started barking and leaping at it. Now, every time he sees a plane, he thinks it's a rabbit, starts chasing it. Even large stars and planets now can rile him up. Boy, did I regret that decision to take him a little bit farther that night. Sometimes it's better just to go home. Now, while that type of regret is pretty minor on the spectrum of regret, sometimes our regrets are much more significant. They can be hurtful words that should not have been said, or emails that should not have been sent, or they can be even larger about major decisions or patterns of behavior that have been unhelpful or even destructive. The story of Noah contains one of the most challenging moments of regret in the entire Torah. Last week, we read of the world's creation, the birth of people, and their missteps, even the first murder. But this week, things get much, much worse. God sees that the people have become so wicked that the Almighty feels that the entire earth must be destroyed, except for, of course, Noah and his family and 2 of every creature. As the text states in the closing verses of last week's Parashat, God realizes, quote, that every plan in people's minds was nothing but evil all the time. Rak ra kol hayom. Then the next verse reads, Vayinachem Adonai ki asa et adam ba'aretz v'yatsev et libo. Adonai, God regretted making human beings on earth, and God's heart was saddened. Things have changed rather quickly. Last week, human beings are seen as the crown of creation and told that they will have the power over the earth to tend the planet. They are the pinnacle of all creation. And now, God regrets their even being created. Building on these contradictory assessments of the value of human beings, the rabbis weave a midrash, a rabbinic narrative. They point out that when God created human beings in last week's parasha, it says, Naaseh Adam b'tsalmenu. Let us make human beings in our image. The rabbis are concerned because the language is plural. To whom is God speaking, and why is the text plural? Of course, one of the major teachings in our tradition is that God is one, monotheism. As God immediately, right at the beginning of the Torah, forgot that. The Midrash says the following: when the time came for the Holy Blessed One to make the first human being, the ministering angels made themselves into competing councils, competing groups of advisors. Some of them said, don't create human beings, and others said, create them. The angel of kindness said, create them, for they will perform acts of chesed, acts of kindness. The angel of truth said, do not create them, for they will be full of lies. The angel of righteousness said, create them, for they will establish courts of justice. The angel of peace said, don't create them, for they will be in constant strife and war. Not only does the Midrash then address this plural problem, to whom is God addressing? Here it's these angels, which some of us, including me, would understand metaphorically, but it also points out to the fundamental tension. Are people good or not? In the end, we know that God creates people, and the Holy One is aware that although people can do evil, that they are worthy of being created. But just a few chapters later, that disappears. God regrets the creation of human beings. Now, how can God regret something, and even more, be sad about it? On a simple level, this is an anthropomorphism. When we ascribe to God human traits, the authors of the Torah ascribe to God these human terms, perhaps to make it easier for us to relate to God. The great biblical scholar, Nachum Sarna, explains it this way, quote, the need for such uses arrives from the inherent tension between God's transcendence and God's immanence. On the one hand, God is conceived to be wholly outside of nature, omniscient, omnipotent, sovereign over time and space. And on the other hand, God is also seen as immanent in the world, not withdrawn, a personal God who's actively engaged in our lives, approachable by them, responsive to their needs. Sarna explains that there are two ways of describing God. One, that God is beyond anything we can conceive of and not changing, not regretting anything. And the other one is a God that we can relate to personally. Now, for many of us, I'll speak for myself, I'm probably more feeling the connection to the God who doesn't change. It feels more philosophically compelling. And that is what is often found in the Torah. For example, the book of Numbers says, God is not capricious or mortal to change God's mind. And similarly, later in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Samuel, it states, God is not human to change God's mind. As Sarna then points out, it's the same root, nun chet mem, nacham, nichem, meaning regret. So the Torah and the Tanakh understands that God does not change the divine's mind in a way that we do, but described it as such so that God could feel more accessible to us. This morning, I want to offer a slightly different way to look at it. Perhaps God is being described as regretting something because the Torah wants us to learn the importance of regret. This feeling is part of the process of reflection. It can help us look at ourselves through a lens that can help us evaluate our actions, opening perhaps a door for us to change our behavior. The rabbis teach that we are supposed to imitate God's actions. And so that sets up the paradigm for our own behavior. We should follow in that same path. For God to regret something and to be saddened by it opens the door for all of us to sometimes regret something and even be saddened by it. It might not be helpful to regret the creation of the entire world and, of course, then destroy it, which I'll leave as a topic for another day. It is helpful to see God as re-examining God's actions. Brene Brown, the acclaimed researcher and author who I've quoted before, reminds us that this phrase that is sometimes used, no regrets, I'm living with no regrets. She says that this doesn't mean it's living with any sense of courage. It means living a life without reflection. And to live without regret, she continues, is to believe that you have nothing to learn, no amends to make, and no opportunity to be braver with your life. Regret is an emotion that can serve a constructive purpose. It can help us in the process for seeking tshuva, for asking for repentance, asking for mechila, forgiveness, which can, of course, lead to nechama, comfort or consolation, the same root that we have been discussing of regret. We see the two sides. Just as God reflects and regrets, so should we do so in an appropriate way, not too harsh on ourselves, but also using it as an opportunity for thinking about our lives. That's how we learn to become the best versions of ourselves, the people we are yet to become. Whether it's teaching a dog, which I can't say I'm doing so well, or parenting a child, which the jury's still out, or living with a partner, or being in a community. We will all have moments of regret. Hopefully, it's what we do with those moments, helping them to allow us to reflect and even helping us to make different choices in the future. Shabbat Shalom.